Okay, today's episode is the black hand behind Antifa. Everyone's convinced that Antifa is the one doing all these shop vandalizations and so forth. We're going to talk about what's behind Antifa, the proxy. A lot of people are saying it's Soros. A lot of people are saying it's DNC. We're going to talk about the connective tissue between Soros and the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and Antifa. That's going to be Imran Awan's organization on Capitol Hill, the spy ring on Capitol Hill. We've talked a lot about it, Pakistani ISI 111, and we're going to prove that to you. And we're going to talk about this program that was started in Pakistan and then went on to other war conflict areas to bring people in the United States to infiltrate them into becoming this non-commissioned officers army for the Department of Homeland Security. Ever since 2001, it's been a plan since 2001 to bring in this foreign army, this mercenary army, to operate in cases of civil insurrection. The MAVNI program is called Military Assets Vitally Needed in Case of Insurrection. There was a cover program of about 30,000 folks that they brought in for students, diplomatic berths and entries, but there was 665,000 entries that were brought in covertly. We can prove that through the FBI agent Mike McMahon that did the vetting. So that's what you're going to learn about. You're going to learn about how the antecedents of this go back to David Petraeus in Princeton, bringing in these Saudi operatives that in the lead up to 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center, and then the PTEC in 1998 into the Treasury, and then also the follow-up in the 2001 bombing with these folks, and how this has been a slow, steady progress to declaring martial law, either medical martial law or civil insurrection, in order to employ MAVNI and in order to actuate MAVNI. So Antifa, just a step. COVID-19, just a step. These are two tripwires in order to implement MAVNI. Okay, it's June 2nd, 2020. George Webb here on the Diplomatic Back Channel, the beautiful Potomac. So a lot of changes in the last 2 months, 3 months for the American people. A lot of shocks to the system, a lot of destabilization of lives, of jobs, a lot of fear, a lot of confusion being injected, a lot of people coming at you with a lot of different things, with videos of destruction, fires, violence against shop owners, and that's on top of everything else after 3 months almost of economic hardship. So a lot is coming at the American people, especially the sort of the backbone of America, the middle class, the working class, that makes the country go, where all the jobs come from as far as small business goes. And it does seem like this is an attack. This seems like a sort of a military attack on the middle class, on small business. But I know there's other channels that will sort of, walk around. I like to walk around and collect evidence. There's a lot to be said for intelligence collection, but you also have to have analysis. You can't just walk around for 3 hours and then all of a sudden say my competitive YouTube person is the head of Antifa or is somehow involved in Antifa, because that shows that you didn't listen very well over 4 years. I really don't want to talk about that today, but I do want us to talk about analysis and why collection is important, but also analysis is important as the intelligence process, a funnel we talked about, the intelligence funnel, how you go from raw information to intelligence. And it really requires looking at metadata. It's this metadata process, a several layer metadata process that we have used on this channel, at least myself, for 4 years, in terms of how do you get to the root cause of a problem? How do you get to the root cause of a problem? And it means looking at associations people have at the company level, associations people have at the political level, associations that they have in news, how they're associated in news events, IP address information, things that are hidden from you, corporate contacts, corporate connections, and so forth. So, and I'll give you an example of this. Right now, everyone is pretty much agreed in the right-wing press anyway that Antifa is doing this. Antifa has infiltrated Black Lives Matter, and Antifa has been infiltrated by some outside group that George Soros ran. George Soros is funding this. This is looks obviously like a DNC George Soros funded series of first of all the bioweapons attack on America and small business, then the looting of the U.S. Treasury through these recovery bills, and now these riots that are being effected against Main Street. Everyone's convinced it's George Soros, and that's sort of where all the stories stop, unless you go to the ridiculous and say somehow I'm associated with running Antifa. But if you look at our channel and you look at the type of analysis, this multi-layered analysis and cross-checking that our channel has done over 4 years, you see that the answers are right there in front of you with Antifa. So let's start with what everyone, at least in the right-wing press, agrees on. If this is Antifa agitated. Antifa's bringing in Black Lives Matter and other groups, paying them to break windows, delivering bricks to the fronts of storefronts, making signs, financing all of this. And George Soros somehow is funding it. Let's just start with that as the baseline. Look at the additional things, the additional metadata that our channel has added to actually put the muscle on the bone, if you will, of that theory. We've talked about how Pakistani ISI 111 has long played a role of sort of a reflecting mirror, if you will, that we send money to Pakistan and Afghanistan, and PAK-ISI routes the technology or routes the people back to the United States to win contracts, to infiltrate into the United States, to sort of be like the non-commissioned officers in the Army. The British East India Company used this same group, this same Wan tribe back in the days of the running drugs in the British East India Company. The non-commissioned officers do all the dirty work. The non-commissioned officers bring all the people and infiltrate all the people into the United States. They do the bank fraud for the loans for their cars and their homes. They do the fraud for stealing identities from the OPM database to get them infiltrated, inculcated into government jobs, etc. That's the job of PAK-ISI. We've talked about that for 4 years, and we put a lot of meat on the bone. For instance, we've talked about George Soros not just being over in Hungary, operating the currency exchanges, not just operating the Open Society Foundation, but actually operating out of the Library of Congress. We talked about his long-term history of giving to the Library of Congress. We've talked about the different programs that have brought people here from Eastern Europe and also from Pakistan, sponsoring them, various different government programs. We've talked about the information stored on the Library of Congress servers and how those terabytes go to Pakistan from our 3 most critical intelligence committees in the House of Representatives, and how that money has filtered back by bringing in people into the United States. We've talked about the programs in detail. If you may remember, we interviewed an FBI agent that actually was responsible for doing the vetting of these people. His name was Michael McMahon. This goes back 3 years ago in Bryant Park that I said this. And he is the one who said 665,000 people were brought into the United States with no checking. These people are typically from ex-war situations, whether it's Al-Shabaab folks from Somalia, or whether it's people from Afghanistan or people from African wars, etc. There was this covert plan called MAVNI, which is military assets vitally needed in case of insurrection. Isn't that exactly where we are right now? Wouldn't the military be pulling out the DNC if they had access to the military assets vitally needed in case of insurrection? Doesn't that sound like a program that's being implemented right now to actuate Antifa? Again, it's doing the work to finding out who those 650,000 people are, but then following up on actually where do they live? Where are the homes that they go to? What are the loans that they get out of the U.S. Congress? What are the resumes that are on Imran Awan's computer that he has as a template form to get them into government jobs? Where are the places in our intelligence apparatus that hack into the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management database for government, where they use these identities to bring in these infiltrates and operatives? This is the non-commissioned level. These aren't the brick throwers. These are the guys setting down the bricks in front of the different shops and stores. We've talked about MAVNI for a long time. We talked about how it originated. I even went to Princeton. Originated with David Petraeus, bringing in royalty from Saudi Arabia and training them and getting university presidents to write letters to bring these operatives in for the initial intelligence operators in the 90s into Princeton. These same folks end up being very involved in the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center, and also P-Tech from Pakistan when Bob Mueller becomes involved in a project called PDD 62 to bring in the Pakistanis into the Treasury Department and so forth. And they become very involved in the 2001 Trade Center bombings. All these things are long-term programs, and we focused on the P-Tech, we've focused on the MAVNI program, that was the David Petraeus program. We've looked at the cutouts, the CIA LLC that had the Dr. Al-Attar from the Iraqi Health Ministry that was committing so much legal fraud, Medicaid fraud here in the United States through a system of fake doctors. We looked at the places where the fake identities were created, called Exact Solutions. So we've really taken a very fine microscope to all of the evidence over a 3-year period of time to look to see how would an infiltration program be set up. This is now, people all of a sudden today are admitting and saying, screaming up at the various channels saying that Antifa, it's an infiltration program. Somebody's behind this infiltration program of Antifa. It's the DNC. But people won't take that next step to look at Debbie Wasserman Schultz being the chairman of the DNC, her assistant, right-hand man as far as these dark arts are concerned since 2004. Imran Awan on Capitol Hill. Remember, he gets motorcades when he goes back to Pakistan, somehow making this small cabal of inexperienced people living in Pakistan are making $4 million on Capitol Hill. Remember, Luke Rosiak with Daily Caller comes out with a story saying, we found the smashed hard drives. The FBI agents found the smashed hard drives at the residence of Imran Awan. Again, we go to knocking on all the doors, and we find a fact witness that says that's Andre Taggart, who says there's government markings on those smashed hard drives. We find the blackberries that are associated with this. And we find the network of 45 different congressmen that are being used to bring these people into the United States. We go to a lot of their districts. We go to Andre Carson's district in Indianapolis. We go to Keith Ellison's district in Minnesota. We go to Minnesota. We go and interview some of the folks that came from Somalia, Al-Shabaab. We go to their clubhouse. We go to the place that was burned down by Al-Shabaab. We identified Minnesota as a probable hotspot of a false flag attack in the future. This is 3-4 years ago now. Turns out Keith Ellison now is the Attorney General of Minnesota. What does he do during the first 3 days after the Floyd George incident? Nothing. He waits to make it look like Trump is waiting. He deliberately doesn't do anything. Keith Ellison deliberately doesn't do anything to try to get information out or try to get an inquiry. He lets it just fester. It may be that these two guys just knew each other. This cop, Chauvin, and George Floyd knew each other for 15 years. Whether they made pornographic films together or not, I don't know. Whether they were bringing in women from war-torn countries and bringing them into this bar, the El Pedro and these other bars that they were supposedly be a part of. I don't know whether they were a part of Antifa, the drug ring that's used to finance these operations. I don't know. But no one seems to be asking that question. Everyone just seems to say, on the MSM, we need to jump to full spectrum dominance. We need to jump to, Kaepernick was right. What was Kaepernick right about? Kaepernick was right about the terabytes going to Pakistan. Kaepernick was right about the hard drives being in Imran's house. What was Kaepernick right about? I'm trying to figure out what Kaepernick was right about. What does two guys who worked together for 15 years, maybe in the porno business, maybe in the drug business, maybe both, maybe bringing in these girls from overseas, what is Colin Kaepernick proving right right? Is he trying to say that blackberries are encrypted and Atlantic Council NATO blackberries were used to affect all this? What is he trying to prove? So it just seems like we have to leap to these illogical conclusions that somehow, we need to have full martial law. We need to have full medical martial law, which we've talked about. Why do we need to do that? Why can't we just do a couple of declassifications that would let the whole world see exactly what's going on? Why don't we unclassify who Anthony Weiner's trusted staff is? Unclassify the 19 or 20 people who negotiated the Iran nuclear deal and were involved in Iran, Iraq, the Iran nuclear deal, the Iraq diversion of NATO funds, Libya to Libya and to Syria and to Sudan and to Yemen. Why don't we unveil that rather than jumping to martial law? Because when you jump to martial law, it really is a restriction on all our freedoms. We're going to find that once we get martial law, it might not be the cure that we want. A pound of cure for the, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. We may get a whole bunch more than a pound of cure. So what I'm saying here is we have a lot of information that's been collected over 4 years with a rock solid case to say, hey, let's go to the next level. Let's look before we leap here and see who is behind this Antifa. Would it be somebody, if it is Soros and it is the Library of Congress, would it be somebody who's sitting in one office building away? Would it have anything to do with Michael Orr, whose father and mother are Bruce and Nellie Orr, who've done these destabilization programs in elections for the last 20 years, who are closely associated with Christopher Steele? They meet with Christopher Steele and do all the disruption in the last election. Could it be that their son, who had the servers at the Library of Congress, are somehow involved as the backbone of this organization in terms of bringing these people in, as far as Antifa is concerned? If you're going to allege that George Soros is funding a spy ring, if you're going to allege that the DNC is administrating the spy ring, if you're going to acknowledge on all the talk shows that this is an Antifa is being financed by this black hand, then you have to go to the next level to identify the actual mechanics of how all this stuff happens. How would they do encrypted communications? Again, we've showed you 3 different solutions. One is the BlackBerry, which we have Phantom Secure and Dmitry Alperovich's encrypted communications. We've talked about the Android solution with Green Zone phones. We've done all the connections to Green Zone phones. And we've talked about Genie, a stealth Genie for the iPhone solution. So all these things, over 3 years ago now, we've talked about this stuff. Again, this is investigative leads that we can follow up on now to see who is the black hand behind Antifa, rather than just wandering around New York for 3 hours and kind of interrupting the only analytical mind, that you have a chance of figuring out the solution. Rather than doing that and then lashing out and then accusing me of being the leader of Antifa, why not look at all the information that's been laid out in front of you over 4 years in terms of the encrypted communication, in terms of the terabytes to Pakistan, in terms of the business connections, in terms of the homes that these people use for safe houses, in terms of the 3 foreigners that we still haven't been unmasked by the New York Times that did the 2 OPM hacks that were done out of Fort Belvoir. Why not look into all the contacts and IP addresses that went into the hoaxing or the simulation around coronavirus, and the people who were in the health maintenance organizations and the health collection organizations that happen to be NATO couriers that were at the Wuhan Games? If it was a simulation run out of the new Wuhan Games, and now it looks like it was just a simulation to get trillions for Democratic congressmen, why not look into the IP traffic that they've had to China since 2016? It seems to be a reasonable thing to do, rather than unmasking whoever Mike Flynn talked to in 2016 and finally getting that information. Why not unmask who those people that are running this COVID-19 simulation, who they were talking to back in Nanjing in 2016? Was it Johns Hopkins University, the Joint Health Surveillance Foundation that's in Nanjing with Johns Hopkins? Let's get to the bottom of shipping 500,000 PCR kits here surreptitiously to Baltimore. All these loose ends that are questions that could lead to lighting up the room rather than us just running blindly through the room and stumbling over all the furniture. Again, this is the stock and trade of what our channel has been doing over the last 4 years. And it is the solution. Turn the lights on before you run through the room. Don't go to medical martial law or martial law as a knee-jerk reaction. Turn the lights on. Don't fall down the stairs. Turn the lights on and proceed slowly and look at all the evidence that's already been collected and laid out in front of you. We've talked about MAVNI for almost 4 years now. We've talked about how there was a small public program, about 50,000, maybe 30,000 people that came in. We talked about the large covert program, 665,000 with FBI agent Michael McMahon. We've talked about how the safe houses were used. We've talked about the different companies that were used. CellPlan was one of the companies, Lightbridge Communications. We've talked about the fake doctor schemes using the medical school in Faisalabad, built by Imran Awan along with Rahm Emanuel. We've talked about the configuring of the blackberries with Andrew Weiner's trusted staff. All these cards are just there for the flipping, right? That Trump could flip these over rather than threatening to upset the apple cart of a long-standing rule that the president will not intervene into a state and send military troops into another state, the posse comitatus rule. Rather than go into that giant constitutional argument, why not just flip over the card? Who configured the network? If somebody's feeding Antifa from the DNC, why not just look and see who did the encrypted communications? Of course they would use encrypted communications for this kind of lawlessness and vandalism, right? Why not see who the 19 people were who did Libya? Why not look at the encrypted communications to China from 2016 until now? Remember, the insurance policy was about that same time. Maybe the insurance policy for medical martial law wasn't quite ready. Maybe that's why Anthony Fauci said Trump will be hit with a medical crisis, a pandemic crisis, but it wasn't quite ready. That insurance policy wasn't quite ready. They tried the 25th Amendment, that didn't work, and they were into the takedowns of Mike Flynn and so forth when Trump took office. So my parting comment here would be, use the information that you've already been given. Turn the cards over that you've already been dealt, rather than asking for something that you might not ever see unwound, which is medical martial law, and then it'll just be martial law. And then once it's in the hands of the continuity of government people, remember, we've talked about these continuity of government people behind all this. These are all continuity of government exercises. We talked about David Grange. We talked about his wife, Sydney Grange, about how she was using the port of Norfolk for the illegal shipments for Libya and Syria. Again, the same blackberries out of the port of Norfolk. We talked about Ollie North and this same crew of people that use continuity of government programs to try to overthrow the president of the United States. It's the same crew. And so the takeaway here is just play the cards you already have rather than hoping for ones that you don't. And don't hope for a solution that you might be the biggest problem you ever asked for in your life, which is martial law.